No one wanted the job. Not after what happened to the last 3 nannies. One quit before sundown, another left crying before noon, and the third? She walked straight into the mansion and never made it past the first tantrum before tossing the house keys back at the driver. The twins Ellis and Evia were only 6, but they had already chewed up and spit out more professionals than a rehab center for troubled teens. And their father? Widowed billionaire Daniel Lockhart was running a tech empire while barely holding it together at home. He had wealth, power, influence, but not even he could control the chaos brewing inside his own house. Then one rainy Thursday morning, a desperate call was made. The agency had no one left, no one but her. Asterisk, the iron gates of the Lockhart estate creaked open slowly, revealing a long driveway lined with towering oak trees and glistening with rain. The early morning mist clung to the hedges like it was trying to hide the truth that behind all the luxury and silence, this place wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress, and it held 2 of the most feared and misunderstood children in the city. Zola and Kendallum stood at the edge of that driveway with a modest suitcase in one hand and a folder of references that no one had cared to read. The driver, a pale man with tired eyes, didn't speak as he opened the car door for her. He only gave her a half-hearted nod before speeding off the moment she stepped down. She was used to that. People rarely looked at her the first time, sometimes not even the second. But that never stopped her from seeing everything. The mansion ahead looked like something out of an old English novel, huge, pristine, and deeply sad. Zola had seen houses like this before. On the outside, they whispered elegance. On the inside, they screamed. She took one breath, tightened her grip on her coat, and stepped forward. The cold cobblestone walkway echoed beneath her shoes. When she rang the bell, it sounded like it came from inside a cathedral, hollow and grand. Moments later, the door opened, revealing a tall, rigid man in his 60s wearing a perfectly pressed black suit. A silver name tag sat on his lapel. "Harold, you must be Miss Kendallin," he said with a subtle pause, eyes glancing quickly over her appearance. "You're late." Zola met his gaze. "I'm actually early," she replied calmly. He blinked once. "You're the only one left on the agency's list. Come in." She followed him through the massive foyer white marble floors, chandeliers that looked like upside-down icebergs, and windows so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Everything gleamed with wealth, but nothing felt warm. It was a museum, not a home. A place where people walked quietly and children were seen only through paintings. "Mr. Lockhart is unavailable," Harold continued. "He leaves before sunrise and returns whenever he remembers he has a family. The twins are in the West Wing. I'd wish you luck, but we both know that never helps." Zola didn't flinch. "I'm not here for luck." "Then you'll fit right in," Harold said with a smirk. They walked past room after room of expensive emptiness, grand pianos no one played, artwork no one noticed, chairs no one sat in. Finally, Harold stopped in front of a heavy oak door. "They're in here." "Try not to take it personally," he said, then turned and left. Zola took a moment, adjusted her scarf, and slowly opened the door. What she saw wasn't surprising. It was sad, but not surprising. The room was supposed to be a study, but it looked like a war zone. Torn books littered the floor. Crayon drawings, angry, repetitive spirals covered the once white walls. A small boy sat in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around his knees, rocking slightly as he whispered something under his breath. A little girl stood on a chair, furiously stabbing a stuffed rabbit with a pencil. When the door creaked, the girl spun around. "You'll be gone before dinner," she said. Zola stepped in, slowly closing the door behind her. "That's a bold prediction." The girl narrowed her eyes. "You're just another one. They always send another one." Zola didn't answer. She walked quietly to the edge of the room, far from both children, and knelt down. I'm not here to control you, she said, voice low and steady. I'm here to learn your names, that's all. The boy didn't look up. The girl, curious now, tilted her head. Why would you want our names? Because names are powerful, Zola replied. And if you let me say yours, then it means you trust me a little, just a little. The girl didn't respond immediately. Then, after a pause, she said, I'm Evie, he's Ellis. Zola smiled. Thank you, Evie. Hello, Ellis. Ellis didn't stop rocking, but his whispering slowed. Zola walked over to a small armchair in the corner and sat. I'm Zola. I don't have magic powers. I don't have fancy tricks. But I have time, and I'll stay until you ask me to leave. Evie snorted. You'll leave when we scream. They all do. Zola nodded. You're probably right. But I've been screamed at before. You don't look scared. I am, but I'm staying anyway. For the first time, Evie looked confused. Like Zola was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Like maybe, just maybe, this woman wasn't going to break. The next few hours passed slowly. Zola didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't clean up the mess, didn't rearrange the books, didn't comment on the crayon graffiti. She simply sat, observed, listened. Evie eventually grew bored of waiting for Zola to run. She sat on the floor with a stack of old coloring books, glancing over every now and then. Ellis remained in his corner, but the humming returned softer. Now less frantic. At one point, Zola pulled out a small book from her coat pocket and began to read to herself. Not aloud, not for their benefit. But Evie noticed. What are you reading? Zola looked up. It's an old story from my village. About a lion who lost his roar. Evie stood. That's dumb. Probably, Zola said. But the lion wasn't scared because he was weak. He was scared because no one ever listened to him roar. Evie hesitated. What happened to him? Zola smiled gently. Someone finally listened. That's when he remembered how loud he really was. Evie stared for a moment, then sat down again. She didn't ask more questions, but she listened. And Ellis? For the first time in hours, he unfolded his legs. Zola and Kendallum didn't come to the Lockhart mansion to fix what was broken. She came to listen to the roar no one else had stayed long enough to hear. Zola rose early on her first full day, long before the mansion stirred. It was still dark outside, and the corridors of the house echoed with nothing but the ticking of antique clocks. In the small servant quarters tucked near the back wing, she prayed silently, an old Igbo prayer her grandmother used to whisper in the mornings. Guide my hands, let my silence teach, and may my presence heal. By 7, the household staff began to move, sluggish and weary, like soldiers repeating a war they never volunteered for. Zola didn't bother making formal introductions, she observed. The cook avoided eye contact. The gardener muttered under his breath about damaged brats. The maids exchanged glances when she passed, already placing mental bets on how long she'd last. Zola had been in rooms like this before, not always in mansions, but in spaces heavy with unspoken trauma. She recognized the smell of disconnection, the way children were spoken about, but rarely too, the way grief got shoved into corners with old toys and locked bedrooms. But Zola didn't come here to fix a house. She came for Ellis and Evie. When she knocked gently on their door that morning, there was no answer. Just a soft shuffle, then silence. She opened it anyway. The twins were curled up on opposite ends of the room, Evie in a fort of pillows on the window seat, Ellis wrapped tightly in a worn blanket under his bed. I'm going to make breakfast, Zola said gently. You're welcome to join me. Or not. Evie peeked out with one eye. Do you even know how to cook? Zola smiled. I grew up cooking over open fire. I think I'll manage. Ellis didn't move. She left them there, walked down to the kitchen, and got to work. No protein smoothies. No artisanal pastries. Just simple eggs, warm bread, sweet potatoes, and mango ripe and soft like home. She hummed as she worked, an old lullaby her mother once sang in the village. A song that didn't translate well into English, but meant something close to "even the tired sun will rise for you." She set the table for 3. Didn't call them. Didn't wait. And 15 minutes later, Evia appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak. Just sat down and picked at the mango slices with suspicious eyes. "You poisoned this?" Zola took a bite from her own plate. "I did." "You'll probably turn into a butterfly." Evia smirked despite herself. Ellis joined quietly. No fanfare, no smile, but he sat. That was enough. Over the next few days, Zola did not introduce new rules. She did not enforce learning schedules. She did not demand manners or structured playtime. She simply existed near them with gentle patience, watering plants, sweeping the library floor, folding napkins in funny shapes, humming stories with no words. The children began orbiting her like cautious moons. Evia started asking questions. Not about math or history, but about Zola. "Why do you talk weird?" "It's my accent, from Nigeria." "Is that in Africa?" "Yes." "Do they have cereal there?" "No, but we have papaya the size of your head." Evia grinned. Ellis was quieter. He didn't ask. He watched. He noticed how Zola never made loud sounds. How she moved without startling anyone. How she let silence stretch until it softened. One afternoon, Ellis followed her into the garden. He didn't speak for 15 minutes. Just trailed her as she pulled weeds. Then he whispered, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Zola didn't look up. "Yes, even the kind that follow kids? Especially those." He nodded and kept walking. That night, Zola stayed near their room as they fell asleep. She didn't read a story, didn't force lights out. She just sat in the hallway with a small book in her lap and a shawl around her shoulders. Evia poked her head out. "You're still here?" "I said I would be." Evia hesitated. "Do you miss your mommy?" Zola looked up. "Every day." Evia nodded, then disappeared back inside. Moments later, Ellis whispered from within, "Can you hum the butterfly song again?" Zola sang softly into the hallway, her voice barely more than a breath. And inside, for the first time in weeks, both children slept without crying. The staff started to notice less screaming, fewer broken things. The house no longer echoed like an abandoned cathedral. Something had shifted. Whispers began among the maids. "The twins are behaving." The cook commented, "They actually ate dinner sitting down." Even Harold, forever composed, muttered under his breath one morning, "Miracles come in strange packages." But Zola didn't believe in miracles. She believed in presence. She had not used punishment or reward. She had used patience. And that was far more powerful. One late afternoon, as the sky turned lavender and gold, Evia handed Zola a photograph. It was crumpled and bent at the edges, the glass frame long gone. In the photo, a smiling woman knelt beside the twins. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes bright. She had the kind of smile that could make flowers grow. "This was Mommy," Evia said. Zola held the photo gently. "She has your eyes." "She used to sing when she cooked," Evia added. "Like you do." Zola sat beside her. "Do you want to tell me more about her?" Evia hesitated, then shook her head. "That's okay," Zola said softly. "You can tell me when you're ready." Ellis joined them quietly and sat on the floor, resting his head on Zola's thigh. "She died in a car," he murmured. "We were asleep. Daddy didn't come to the hospital, just lawyers." Zola stroked his hair gently. "I'm so sorry." Evia's voice cracked. "Everyone says we should forget." Zola looked at them both. "You don't have to forget. You just have to remember how to live while still remembering her." They didn't say anything, but neither moved away. That evening, Daniel Lockhart came home early. He hadn't meant to. His meeting was canceled. Traffic was light, and something had pulled at him, an invisible string tied back to the house he'd been avoiding for so long. stepped through the front doors and heard it immediately. Laughter, real, unforced laughter. Coming from the kitchen, he followed it, unsure whether he should. Inside, he found his children sitting at the counter, their faces covered in flour, giggling. As Zola pulled a loaf of banana bread from the oven, Ellis was talking animatedly, and Evia was dancing in her chair. Daniel froze. It felt like intruding on a dream. Zola noticed him, gave a small nod, then returned to slicing the bread. Evia turned and blinked. "Daddy?" Daniel tried to smile. "Hi, baby." Ellis stared, cautious. Zola didn't say anything, and Daniel suddenly felt like a stranger in his own home. Zola stood silently in the doorway of the children's room, her arms crossed gently over her chest. In front of her, Abigail was on the floor, tears streaming down her face as she screamed at her brother, who was huddled in a corner clutching a torn picture frame. The commotion had drawn Mrs. Livingston and one of the maids to the top of the stairs, but neither dared enter. They had tried and failed too many times. Zola, however, stepped inside with the calm of someone who had seen chaos before and didn't flinch. She didn't yell. She didn't beg them to stop. She simply walked over, knelt beside Abigail, and said quietly, "Pain doesn't go away by breaking things, baby. It only spreads." Abigail froze mid-scream. Her lips trembled. It was the first time anyone had looked at her tantrum, not with fear, but with understanding. Zola reached into her bag and took out a small hand-carved wooden doll. "This," she whispered, "is Ngozi. She was mine when I was your age. She helped me when I was sad." Abigail stared, silent now. The rage in her body hadn't disappeared, but Zola's presence made it feel safer to hold. The girl reached out slowly and took the doll, her fingers trembling. Meanwhile, Elijah continued crying in the corner, whispering to the broken frame, "Mommy's gone. Mommy's gone." Zola approached him just as gently. "You miss her, don't you?" she asked. He nodded. "Tell me about her. Tell me your favorite thing about your mommy." He hesitated. She smelled like flowers, and she reads stories in silly voices." Zola smiled. "Then she must have been wonderful. I'm sure she'd want you to keep remembering her with happy things." Elijah looked up, wide-eyed. No one had asked him that. Not the therapists. Not even his father. They all focused on fixing the outbursts, not the wound underneath. Zola sat with them for over an hour, talking, listening, allowing the silence to stretch when needed. For the first time in months, the twins didn't push someone away. They let her stay. That evening, Mr. Lockhart returned home later than expected. He loosened his tie at the door and was met with something he hadn't experienced in nearly a year. Silence. No crashing sounds. No screaming. He walked upstairs cautiously, wondering if the kids had fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. But when he peeked inside their room, what he saw made him stop cold. Zola was sitting cross-legged between the two beds, softly telling a story in a sing-song voice. Abigail was curled up beside her, her thumb in her mouth, a habit she had taken up after their mother's death. Elijah lay on the bed, eyes heavy but watching Zola's hands as she animated the tale of a brave lion cub searching for its mother. Zola noticed Mr. Lockhart in the doorway. She gave him a gentle nod and continued the story without missing a beat. He didn't say a word, but in his eyes, for the first time in months, was something close to hope. The following days brought small miracles that the staff whispered about in disbelief. Abigail started eating again, not a full plate, but more than the few nibbles she'd survive on. Elijah began sleeping through the night without waking up screaming. They even allowed Zola to hold their hands when walking through the garden. Word spread quickly among the mansion's workers. The new nanny was different, but not everyone saw it as a blessing. Mrs. Livingston, who had been with the Lockhart family for over a decade, watched Zola with growing suspicion. She didn't understand how a woman with no formal education in trauma or child psychology could achieve in days what trained professionals failed to do for months. "She's manipulating them," she muttered one evening to another housekeeper. "Mark my words, she's clever, but she's not qualified. We don't know anything about her past." "She's kind," the other replied, glancing toward the hallway. "That seems to be enough for the twins." Mrs. Livingston's lips tightened. In her eyes, kindness wasn't enough, especially not in a house built on rules, order, and expectations. By the end of the first week, Zola had settled into a rhythm. She didn't treat the children like they were fragile. She gave them responsibilities, helping to water plants, fold napkins, even make their own beds. She treated them like they were capable, even when they weren't sure themselves. And in doing so, she gave them back something they hadn't felt in a long time: control. One rainy afternoon, Zola brought out paper and colored markers. "We're going to draw what joy looks like," she announced. Abigail blinked. "Joy? Yes, my dear, if you could see it." "What color would it be? What shape?" The twins stared at the paper. It was an abstract question, far more complex than it sounded. But slowly, Abigail reached for a pink marker, while Elijah picked blue. Minutes turned into an hour, and the table was soon filled with drawings of sunshine, flowers, stick figures dancing under stars. Mr. Lockhart passed by and stopped at the doorway, stunned by the sight. His children, laughing together. That night, after the twins were asleep, Zola stood by the window of the guest room she had been assigned. The rain still pattered softly against the glass. She pulled from her pocket an old photo, worn, nearly faded. It was of her and a young boy, both sitting under a tree. Her younger brother, killed years ago in a village conflict. When she was still a teenager, Zola's fingers trembled slightly. She had promised herself she'd do something that mattered, that she'd help at least one child survive the grief that had nearly consumed her own family. A knock came at her door. She turned quickly, tucking the photo away. Mr. Lockhart stood there. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, awkwardly, as though unfamiliar with the shape of the words. Zola offered a soft smile. "They're good kids. They just needed someone to see them." He nodded slowly. "I haven't known how to look at them since her death. It's like they remind me too much of what I've lost." "They also remind you of what you still have," Zola said gently. "That's why it hurts." He stared at her, something stirring in his expression, a flicker of understanding. Or maybe guilt. Zola didn't press further. She just offered a quiet, "Good night, sir." He hesitated, then nodded and walked away. But the peace wouldn't last. A storm was brewing inside the estate, not just from grief, but jealousy, pride, and secrets long buried beneath luxury and silence. And Zola, the woman who had brought light into the mansion, was about to be accused of the unthinkable. To be continued. Zola was just beginning to feel settled, not comfortable, not yet, but settled. The twins had begun calling her Miss Zola with ease. They waited by the stairs every morning to walk with her to the breakfast room, and Mr. Lockhart, though still emotionally distant, had become noticeably more present in his children's lives. But beneath the surface, tension rippled like an underground stream. Mrs. Livingston watched Zola with eyes that missed nothing. The children's sudden improvements, the softening of Mr. Lockhart's expression, all of it threatened the careful order she had long maintained in the mansion. She had spent years serving the Lockhart household, and in just a few weeks, this woman, this outsider, was becoming central. And Mrs. Livingston didn't trust outsiders. Especially not ones who seemed too good to be true. It started subtly. One morning, Abigail's favorite hair ribbon went missing. Then the next day, a small jade elephant figurine, part of a priceless antique collection in the parlor, couldn't be found. The children insisted they didn't take it. The other staff were confused but hesitant to speak. Mrs. Livingston made a quiet comment over breakfast. Sometimes when people come from less fortunate backgrounds, they have different ideas about what belongs to whom. Mr. Lockhart didn't respond at first, brushing it off. But when the missing figurine still didn't turn up 3 days later, he finally confronted Zola. It was late evening. The children were in bed, and Zola was cleaning paintbrushes from a craft project. "Zola," Mr. Lockhart said from the doorway, his voice neutral but cold. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up. "Of course." He hesitated. "Did you happen to see a small jade elephant anywhere?" "It's been missing for several days." Her brows drew together. "No, sir. I haven't." "Was it in the parlor?" He nodded. Zola stood straighter. "I haven't touched anything there. I mostly stay with the children or in the kitchen." He watched her carefully, as if searching for any micro-expression that might betray her. Zola didn't flinch. "I'm not accusing you," he added quickly, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. "Just trying to be thorough." Zola gave a faint, understanding nod. "I would never take what isn't mine." Mr. Lockhart left the room with a curt nod. But his silence spoke louder than words. Later that night, Mrs. Livingston made her move. She entered the laundry room, where all staff kept personal belongings in cubbies, and after a quick glance over her shoulder, opened Zola's locker. There, inside a folded shawl, was the missing jade elephant, exactly where she had planted it. She closed the door and smiled. The next morning, Zola was summoned to Mr. Lockhart's private office. She walked in calmly, but something in the air was different. Tighter. He motioned to the chair across from him. She sat. "I asked all staff to check their belongings," he said evenly. "And Mrs. Livingston found this." He placed the jade elephant on the desk between them. Zola's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in disbelief. That wasn't there before. "It was in your locker." She shook her head. "Someone put it there." "Zola, no." She interrupted softly but firmly. "I understand how this looks, but I have never taken anything from this house. I wouldn't even let the children keep pebbles from the garden without asking permission." Mr. Lockhart stared at her, his jaw clenched. His instincts told him Zola wasn't lying, but the object was found in her space. "I need time to think," he said finally, standing up. "You're suspended for now, just until I sort this out." Zola rose slowly. "May I say goodbye to the children?" He looked away. "No, it's better if we don't confuse them." She nodded once, her throat tight, but she didn't argue. She walked out of the office without looking back. When the children woke up, Zola was gone. "She said nothing?" Abigail asked, looking around the empty hallway with disbelief. Mrs. Livingston smiled tightly. She left. "Some people just aren't meant to stay, dear." Elijah didn't speak. He simply walked to the small table where his drawing of the lion cub, the one Zola helped him make, sat. He touched it with his fingertips, then whispered she wouldn't just leave. But Zola was already halfway across town, walking through the streets with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and tears threatening behind her eyes. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not again. Back at the mansion, the air turned cold. The children refused to eat lunch. Abigail threw her cereal bowl across the room the next morning. Elijah wouldn't speak to anyone, even his father. Mr. Lockhart began to feel it, the void Zola left behind. Her absence was more powerful than her presence had ever been. And that's when it happened. 3 days later, while cleaning out the guest linen closet, the youngest maid found something strange behind a stack of towels. A small pink ribbon. Abigail's missing ribbon. Confused, she followed her instinct and quietly checked the staff's quarters, specifically Mrs. Livingston's room. What she found shocked her. Tucked inside a shoebox under the bed were several items that had gone missing over the past few weeks, including the jade elephant. She reported it immediately. And this time, Mr. Lockhart didn't hesitate. He summoned Mrs. Livingston and confronted her directly. Her excuses crumbled under the weight of the evidence. She tried to lie at first, claiming Zola must have hidden them there too. But her face gave away the truth. "I've served this house for 12 years, she cried. "And you throw me away for her?" "She didn't steal," Mr. Lockhart said firmly, "but you did." Mrs. Livingston was escorted out that same evening. By the time Mr. Lockhart tracked Zola down, she was staying in a small boarding house outside the city. He arrived unannounced, stepping out of a black car that didn't belong in the dusty alleyway. Zola answered the knock on her door with surprise and guarded eyes. "I know the truth now," he said simply. Zola said nothing. "I was wrong to doubt you." She looked away. "It's not the first time I've been accused of something I didn't do. I know, and I'm sorry." His voice was hoarse now. "But the kids, they miss you." Zola swallowed. "They're strong. They'll heal. But not without you." She hesitated. For the first time since she'd arrived in this country, someone was asking her to come back, not out of convenience, but because she mattered. "Please," Mr. Lockhart said. "They need you, and maybe I do too." Zola finally nodded. And the next morning, the children awoke to find her standing in the hallway again, holding her small bag, her warm smile, and her unbreakable spirit. Abigail ran into her arms. Elijah followed, pressing his face into her side. And in that moment, the mansion no longer felt haunted. It felt like home. That night, the mansion was unusually silent. The echoes of laughter from the previous day had faded into soft breathing and peaceful dreams. Zola sat quietly in the nursery's reading nook, the glow of a small nightlight casting long shadows across the plush carpet. She was still awake, watching over both twins as they slept, her heart full but restless. The door creaked slightly. It was Jonathan. He stepped in hesitantly, still dressed in a loose cashmere sweater and slacks. His hair was tousled, his eyes tired, but there was something different in the way he looked at Zola now. Less like an employer, more like someone desperately trying to understand a person who had shifted the entire axis of his home. I thought I'd find you here," he said in a low voice. Zola turned and nodded, her voice soft. "They had a good day." Jonathan's eyes landed on his children. The peace on their faces, real, genuine peace, was something he hadn't seen since Sophia's passing. He leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "How do you do it?" he asked. "I've had therapists, teachers, special consultants. No one got them to even talk this much, let alone laugh." Zola offered a gentle smile. "Because I don't see them as problems to solve. I see them as hearts trying to heal." Jonathan's throat tightened. He didn't know why her words struck him so deeply. Maybe because he realized he hadn't been trying to heal them, he'd just been trying to manage them. There was silence between them. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "You should know that. There's pressure for me to let you go." Zola didn't respond immediately, just turned slightly in her chair. "Because of who I am?" He nodded once. "The board, investors, family. Some of them think hiring someone without a pedigree, without even an agency vet, was reckless. And yes, some of them said things that ... had nothing to do with your resume." Zola met his eyes. "And what do you think, Mr. Lockhart?" He stared at her. "I think you might be the first person to bring light into this house since my wife died." She said nothing, but the way her eyes softened told him she understood exactly what that meant. The next day brought something unexpected. As the family sat down to breakfast, Zola in her usual place by the island counter, the twins by the big oak dining table, a sharp knock came at the front door. Jonathan went to open it, expecting perhaps a delivery or a staff member. Instead, he found his sister, Veronica Lockhart, cold, elegant, razor-sharp in a gray power suit. "I came to talk about her," Veronica said, walking in without waiting. "To be invited." Zola turned as Veronica's heels clicked against the marble floor. The air grew tense. Even the twins seemed to sense the shift. "She's not qualified," Veronica snapped. And it's completely inappropriate for someone with her background to be responsible for your children. Zola didn't flinch, but she stood slowly, her posture composed. What exactly is my background, Ms. Lockhart? She asked, voice firm but calm. Veronica scoffed. You're not even from here. No one knows anything about you. You come into this house with your quiet ways, and somehow you've manipulated these children into trusting you. Zola looked at Jonathan, then back at Veronica. I didn't manipulate them, I listened. I cared. And maybe that's something this house has been missing for a long time. Veronica turned to Jonathan. You're risking everything because you're grieving. Or worse, because you're, she paused, lips tightening, lonely. Jonathan's expression darkened. Stop, Jonathan. No, he said firmly. Zola has done more for my children in 2 weeks than an army of professionals have in a year. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. Veronica's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room, then turned and stormed out. Later that afternoon, Zola stood in the garden, staring out at the wildflowers she and the twins had planted. Jonathan joined her quietly, hands in his pockets. I'm sorry about that, he said. Veronica has always thought money gives her the right to dictate everything. Zola gave a small smile. She's not wrong about me not being from here. I came from Nigeria when I was 20, cleaned hotel rooms, waited tables. I raised other people's kids while sending money to help my family back home. He looked at her with new eyes. That's incredible. It's life, Zola replied. It doesn't always go the way we want, but we can still make it beautiful. He stepped closer. Why do you care so much about Ella and Miles? She turned toward him. Because no one should grow up feeling like they're alone in the world. His gaze lingered on her, her strength, her gentleness, the gravity she carried without ever raising her voice. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not just admiration. Not just gratitude. Hope. Peace doesn't last forever. That night, the twins screamed in their sleep, both of them. Nightmares, violent ones. Zola rushed in first, holding Miles as he thrashed, whispering in his ear. Jonathan grabbed Ella, trying to wake her gently. What happened? He asked, panicked. Zola's eyes were wide. Did something happen today? Did someone say something? Jonathan shook his head, but then he froze. Veronica. He remembered the look she gave the twins as she left, cold, cutting. And something about the way she said, "You've manipulated them." Zola turned to him. She said something, didn't she? Something that reopened the wounds they were just starting to heal from. Jonathan clenched his jaw. I'll handle it. But Zola gently put a hand on his shoulder. Let me. He nodded, trusting her again, more than he trusted himself. Zola stayed up with the children all night, rocking them, singing softly in Yoruba, the lullabies of her own childhood. She held their fears like fragile glass in her palms, and didn't let go until the light broke through the windows again. The morning sun cast golden light across the Lockhart estate, but inside the nursery, the weight of the night still lingered. Zola had not slept. Her eyes were tired, her voice hoarse from whispering comfort through the long hours, but her presence remained steady like the last candle flickering in a storm. Jonathan stepped inside, just as Ella finally drifted off again, curled against Zola's shoulder like a baby bird returning to its nest. He exhaled, hands on his hips. How do you do it? Zola gently laid Ella down beside her brother, tucking the covers around both children. Because I've known fear. I've known what it's like to have your world ripped apart and still be expected to behave. He swallowed. Hard. They'll never be the same without you. Zola turned to him. They don't have to be the same. They just have to feel safe becoming who they really are. Jonathan nodded, then pulled a folded envelope from his pocket. This arrived this morning from the school board. Zola took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a letter, an apology, official, and stamped. The school had investigated the complaints made by Veronica and found no evidence of wrongdoing on Zola's part. In fact, the letter expressed surprise at the positive progress observed in both children since Zola's involvement. She blinked, stunned. How? I may have sent them footage, Jonathan said, chuckling, of Miles reciting a poem by memory, of Ella painting again. You brought something out of them that no one else could. Zola's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Stay, he said suddenly, permanently. Her eyes widened. Mr. Lockhart. Jonathan, he said, please, you're not our employee anymore. You're our family. There was a beat of silence between them, a moment full of quiet awe. Then the children stirred, and both adults turned to them instinctively, Zola smoothing Ella's curls, Jonathan adjusting Miles's pillow. Two pairs of hands, one black and one white, both working toward the same sacred purpose. Healing. Weeks passed. What once felt like a cold museum of grief transformed into a home filled with rhythm and joy. Zola became more than a nanny. She was the twins' mentor, confidant, and anchor. She introduced them to her culture music from West Africa, spicy jollof rice, bedtime stories about brave queens and clever children. Ella began drawing stories about magical African princesses. Miles started asking Zola to teach him Yoruba phrases. One day, Jonathan walked into the kitchen to find all three dancing barefoot to a gem drum beat on the Bluetooth speaker. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a guest in his own house. He belonged again, and something deeper began to bloom between him and Zola, slow, respectful, and full of unspoken meaning. Late night talks over tea, quiet laughter in the hallway, the way their eyes found each other in rooms full of noise. It wasn't fast. It wasn't planned, but it was real. Then came the gala. It was the annual Lockhart Foundation charity event, a sprawling, glittering evening attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and the richest families in the state. Jonathan invited Zola as a guest, not staff. She wore a flowing deep blue gown with gold embroidery that shimmered against her dark skin. Her hair was braided into a crown, regal and effortless. When she walked into the ballroom on Jonathan's arm, the room went still. People whispered, cameras clicked. Veronica's face turned ghost pale. Jonathan leaned in and whispered, let them stare. They don't know who you are. Zola smiled, eyes scanning the glittering room. They will. She didn't try to impress. She simply spoke from the heart when people asked about her. She told them about resilience, about children, about what it means to rebuild a broken home with nothing but love. By the end of the night, even the most skeptical donors were singing her praises. She didn't belong in the background anymore. She belonged everywhere. Later, after the last bottle of champagne had been popped and the final song faded, Jonathan walked her out to the garden where soft lanterns flickered in the trees. I should say something, he began. Zola raised an eyebrow. You've said a lot tonight. I mean something important, he said, about us. She went quiet. I thought I'd never love again, he confessed. I thought Sophia was the last light I'd ever know. But you're not just light, you're fire. And you brought warmth to everything she left behind. Zola's eyes brimmed with tears. You don't have to say this. I want to say it. I want the kids to grow up in a home where love isn't buried in sorrow, where joy doesn't feel like betrayal. Zola took his hand. And what about all the people watching? All the ones who think we shouldn't be? Let them watch, he said. They watched us grieve. Now they can watch us rise. They stood under the stars, two souls from different worlds finally aligned. 1 year later, the twins stood proudly at the front of a small school stage. Miles wore a blue blazer. Ella wore a dress she had sewn herself. They both held microphones in their little hands. Behind them stood Zola, her eyes misty with pride. And now, Ella said, we'd like to thank someone very special. She saved us. Not with magic, but with kindness, Miles grinned. "This is for Zolan Kemdalam, our mom now." The audience gasped. Then clapped. Jonathan watched from the crowd, his arm around Zola's waist. They'd married in a quiet ceremony under the same tree where they once planted sunflowers with the kids. It hadn't been easy. But love, like the strongest roots, had taken hold where no one thought it could. Not in spite of who Zola was, but because of it.